Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk about the Leatherman Wave 2nd generation. This is the next iteration in line from the 1st generation and the one before the current iteration, the Wave Plus. This design built upon the 1st generation in a lot of new and innovative waves in my opinion. And it added a lot of nice utility type features to the tool, which we'll be going over and comparing to the 1st generation of the Leatherman Wave. This is the kind of tool that you would buy that is a one and done kind of tool because it has a good feature set of tools in there that would meet the criteria for most people in a general setting. It's not a heavy duty tool, but it is a EDC type of tool which can come in handy in a pinch. And the one I've had for over 18 years or so, or around thereabouts at least. I've used it in different settings, and it's my most used Leatherman that I've owned since I've owned the BST. Here in the table we can see the Leatherman Wave 2nd generation, and we'll go ahead and get the 1st generation out, which we'll be using as a side-to-side comparison, and we might as well show the current iteration of the Wave Plus. So we have the 1st iteration here, the 2nd in the center, and 3rd on the right. As we can see, there's a couple of differences, namely the physical appearance of a pocket clip on the 2nd and 3rd generation, and a little bit wider and beefier setting for the 2nd and 3rd as well. They also feature a lanyard holder in each of the 2nd and 3rd ones, but I don't pull them out. They're in the back of the scale here, or back of the tool set here. So just for purposes of identifying tools, these other two do have a lanyard holder that's a little bit different than the 1st generation. So let's go ahead and compare the 1st and 2nd generation together as we go through the tool sets. On the outside, we do have the continued tradition of marking the jimping. Although it's a little bit more predominantly marked on the 1st generation, you can still feel it on the 2nd generation. This is for when you're handling the tool and you can't look at which side you have out. You can kind of feel the side to kind of get an idea of which knife blade you want to get out, basically. And that does come in handy when you're working on something and you can't see what you're grabbing. So, and it also is one-handed and liner locking, much like the 1st generation. So let's go over the straight blades first. I'm going to pop them out and just go over the size differences here a little bit. They're both liner locking, and we can see there's substantially more blade thickness, or width if you will, for the 2nd generation, so they improved it a little bit, and it's a little bit different type of cut here, I think. I'm not a blade expert, so I can't really give you the exact terminology here, but you can see it's thicker and I believe a slight bit longer. Yeah, just a tiny bit, a hair longer, and a little bit more cutting real estate if you compare the beginning where the blade begins here. Next up we have our saw here, if I can get this one out. It's always been a kind of a challenge on the 2nd generation. 1st generation comes out kind of nice here. So we can see the saw length here is about the same number of teeth, and a little bit wider on the 2nd generation, as we can see here on both sides. So not too bad. And they both liner lock as well. Next up is our serrated blades. And on the 2nd generation, as we can see here, it's much thicker and a little bit more cutting real estate in terms of the teeth arrangement. This is rounded on the sheep's foot edge over here, and I don't know what to call this one here, but it's a little bit more angular. It's not sharp though. And we do have a little bit more real estate for the draw cut edge here on the Wave 2 versus the Wave 1. And flip that over and see the cutting edge here. And it's a slight bit hair longer. And let's go ahead and get the 3-sided file/metal saw on both of these. So they did continue the tradition of having a diamond coated side, which is a fantastic idea. You get a little bit more real estate with the 2nd one, and we have our metal file on the bottom here, which is roughly the same, I think, in terms of the teeth and gradient. And then we have our crosshatch section here on the 2nd generation. And they both liner lock as well. So before we move on to the internal tools, let's note that these fasteners or the screws are flat on the original, but they're raised on the newer ones, which is kind of interesting how they changed that. And note the spring releasers for the locking tools on the inside, which we don't have for the first generation here. So that's important to note. Let's go ahead and open up the plier head section here. And we might as well get our other third generation out for comparison briefly here. And we'll go over the second generation head. So we have 3 generations here. We have the first generation, which has a longer, kind of thinner profile for the needle nose section. It's got fine gradient teeth, standard teeth for the regular pliers, and a smaller real estate for wire cutting compared to the other 2 models. The second generation, the one we're talking about today, has much more surface area for cutting and pretty much the same kind of gradient for the tooth here, but it's a little bit thicker in the edge here, and same type of pliers on the inside there. And it changes compared to the third generation, where they have the replaceable 154 cm wire cutters here, and the teeth in the third generation is more coarse than the teeth in the previous 2 iterations. So that's important to note, but it's still the same standard internal pliers there as well. Okay, so we have the fine tooth section, regular section, and the wire cutter section here. Let's start with the scale tools here, or rather the handle tools. We have a marking for the inches and centimeters on the wave on both sides, where the wave 1 does not have that. So that's important to note. Let's go ahead and start with the tool set on this side. We have our slotted screwdriver here. This one's pretty big and strong, and let's go ahead and grab our slotted screwdriver here. Compared to the first generation, it's a little bit shorter and not as thick or long. And this one locks, unlike the first generation. Let's go ahead and switch sides here, because the tool set's a little bit different for each one. We're going to get on to the, I believe, try to pick it out here. We have an interchangeable bit setting, the first one for this side, and that is our small adapter set here, which has a Phillips head type screwdriver and also a slotted screwdriver for glasses, if you will. That's the most immediate thing you would use this for. It is extremely fragile, so you don't want to put too much pressure on it, but it does get retained here with the spring and this latch system, and also is locking in place. The most direct comparison to that would be the smallest tweaker, what I call tweaker screwdriver, or a slotted screwdriver here. Moving along, we have the scissors to get to, and it's changed from the first generation to the second. It's relatively the same in the third generation from the second, so we won't have to go over that, but it is important to note here. And let's go ahead and try to pull this out in the first generation without getting cut here. So we can see immediately with the second generation, it's got a smaller pair of scissors, and the depressors here are a little bit different, shorter in length and a little bit smaller, and less real estate for the surface area on the cutting edge. So a little bit smaller scissors, but nonetheless pretty precise. What I've noticed with the less surface area on the second generation, it's less prone to getting jammed up and gummed up from material like, say, tape, glue, and residue compared to the first generation. And it's still relatively a sharp pair of scissors and can cut precisely. It's not anywhere near to the level of a Victorinox pair of scissors, but that is the difference between the first generation and second generation pair of scissors here. And this one does not lock the first generation, and the second generation does lock here. It's a little bit easier to take out too as well. Jumping back over to the other side here, let's go ahead and go over the tool set for this side. We have a interchangeable bit driver section here. We have a 2D Phillips head driver here, and I'll get the other one out to compare it to the first generation. Now this is where it kind of takes a inferior leap back, in my opinion, because the first generation has a true 3D Phillips head with a thin shank to it, though. So you can see the difference there, 2D versus 3D. However, this one, you can interchange the bits that come out to a slotted screwdriver or a Phillips head. And the way this works here is that there's a small catch here, which catches on a V notch in the center of the bits. These are proprietary bits that Leatherman makes, and they make a variety of different kits that have different bits with them. So you can kind of change your bits in and out how you want. So this is a modular adapter port. In addition to that, they make adapters that extend out that can attach to regular 1/4-inch bits, ratcheting drivers, if you will, and other sorts of types of modular adaptive tools, which they have on the aftermarket as well. So it's a highly, what I would call modular section, which is good. Some people love this, some people hate it. I don't mind it. I much rather prefer have a 3D inline screwdriver into the system and a thing that would attach to the outside of that to kind of make it modular, but I digress. This is actually a pretty good system that they came out with, and in some ways an upgrade to the older system, if not an inferior type of grade, which is kind of not an upgrade, but you get what I'm saying. Basically, it's not a 3D Phillips head screwdriver, which is kind of a bummer, but you can attach attachments that do have a 3D Phillips head screwdriver, so it kind of negates itself a little bit. I digress, though, and moving on to the can opener bottle cap lifter. It's a little bit different than the first generation. The first generation is a little bit smaller and thinner, in my opinion, and we can see that with our V-notch wire cutters here, and the length of the bottle cap lifter can opener combo tool here. We can see the V-notch here, as opposed to the V-notch on the first generation right there. It's a little bit smaller, not as wide, and our cutting edge here is, again, smaller, maybe not as long. So it's a little bit different in the second generation, somewhat of an upgrade in my opinion, because it does lock still, whereas the first generation does not lock, hard lock at least. So that is the tool set comparison for the second generation Leatherman Wave compared to the first, so you can kind of see all the differences that came about from the first generation, which is an excellent tool in my opinion. And while being very weight conscious and small, the other main thing to note is that there's no pocket clip with the first generation, whereas we do have the pocket clip on the second and third generation. Overall, this is a great multi-tool in my opinion, and I've used this one the longest in my collection. I got this as a gift, I think, back in 2007 or 8. Or 6, I don't remember which year it was, but it was the mid-2000s, and I've been using it the longest. I had a PST before that in high school, and I used that for quite a while, but this was my main tool for about, I want to say 15 years or so, and it served me very well. The only thing is with this tool is that some of the bits can get lost easily or broken. I did break that smaller, thinner bit section, this guy here, so you want to be careful with that. But other than that, it's a fantastic tool. The thing I want to remind people about compared to the third generation is that this section here is actually a little bit stronger than the replaceable wire cutter section here on the third generation. I would prefer this if I weren't doing as much wire cutting as a just strong head to use. But other than that, it's a great multi-tool, and I think if anyone wants to buy a one-and-done multi-tool, either iteration would be fine if you don't plan on cutting a lot of wire with the tool itself. If you cut a lot of wire, probably the newer one might be a better option. And if you don't mind having slightly different teeth arrangements in the plier heads, fine gradient versus a little bit more coarse gradient, then go for the second generation. They do go for a little bit cheaper than the third generation on the used market, and you can definitely get adapters for it to use with the modern bit exchanger system that Leatherman has out right now. So I think it's a great modular platform, a much more improved platform over the first generation Wave in many ways, not in every way, but in most ways. And I think a lot of people would find this one pretty interesting if they could find it used for a good price and deal. So I definitely recommend it for EDC carrying, hiking, emergency use. Even on the job, I've used this one before in the light duty sense. But that is the Leatherman Wave, the model here that kind of in my opinion, really put this series on the board for most people. That's all I have to say about the Leatherman Wave. Let me know what you think, if you have one, what you use it for, and I want to thank you for watching, and also enjoy your day.